Larry is coming up to introduce our speaker, Barry Pencek. Thank you, Larry.
Early in mid-70s, my squadron was transitioning from transport helicopters, the old Sikorsky H-34. Some of you are old enough to remember that. All of you are old enough to remember that. And we were transitioning from transports to UH-1s, Huey gunships, and then ultimately to Cobras. I was in the ops section of the squadron. I was pilot training officer and ultimately the operations officer. And I had a problem. Most of the guys in the squadron at that time had been transport drivers, helicopter transport drivers in Vietnam. And we know they did some incredibly courageous things. Some of you out there participated in them. You know, emergency medevacs and night inserts and extracts and assaults into hot landing zones, et cetera, et cetera. But many of them came back from Vietnam and were perfectly content in peacetime to fly straight and level from point A to point B. And that's an entirely different mindset from being a shooter instead of a shootee. The transport guys had spent most of their time as shootees. That's bad enough, but you got to have a different mindset to be a helicopter attack pilot. And that's where this guy comes in. Snake Pencek had been one of our very first graduates, I think the first one in the squadron, to graduate from the Marine Aviation Weapons and Tactics Instructor course, which is sort of the Marine Aviation version of Top Gun. And he came into the squadron with that knowledge and experience from Vietnam, which you're going to hear about, along with a number of other guys who had either Huey guns or Cobra experience. And that made a dramatic transition in the squadron from what I used to call a flying club to an actual combat-ready squadron. And it paid off in Desert Storm, it paid off in Iraq, and it paid off in Afghanistan. And he's going to tell you a little bit more about a particular incident, a lot more, I think, he's going to tell us about the particular incident which many of you remember reading about, not only the actual event when it occurred, but also the incredibly slanderous coverage of it after it occurred on CNN. When he's got all the details, I'll turn it over to him. Colonel Snake Pencek, USMCR, retired.
Larry, these yours. Thank you, General Taylor, and I'd like to thank Art and Skip for inviting me here today. As I said, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or maybe the wrong place at the wrong time, and ended up on a mission called Operation Tailwind, and it was one of those across the fence things that you never spoke about, but it became public knowledge, so I'll give you a rundown on it. What we call the war in Vietnam, most historians call the Second Indochina War. And in 1959, the NVA created the 559th Transportation Group, and they built this thing that we ended up calling the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And it was to support insurgencies in Laos and then later in South Vietnam and Cambodia. So the CIA had people there to keep an eye on what they were doing. International politics played a big role in this, in that both Cambodia and Laos claimed neutrality, and they walked a tightrope between those who were leaning to going with the North and those leaning with going to the South. So it was a delicate situation. The Ho Chi Minh started as just basically a trail, and we called it a trail. But it began with some barefoot peasants pushing bicycles. They'd put a piece of bamboo across the handlebars here and another vertical and load it down like a pack mule and push it down the trail. But by 1970, it was an engineering marvel. It had mostly gravel roads. They would tie the tops of trees together and pull them over so you couldn't see the roads. Build bridges just 12 inches underneath the streams, under the water, so they couldn't be seen with the air. and there were 6 pipelines carrying kerosene, gasoline, and whatever all, plus phone lines and everything else. And it was pretty well covered, as many of you know, with anti-aircraft positions. Traffic was basically seasonal, the dry season, November to April, and you can't probably read that slide on the right, but it says in that area right there, and forgive my shaky hands, rainfall is 120 to 140 inches of rain a year. So in the wet season, it was really wet. And, there we go. Okay, in 1965, Prince Sihanouk, the leader of Cambodia, caved to the pressure from the communists, and he severed diplomatic relations with the U.S. and threw us out of the country. Invited in the 559th Transportation Group, and they constructed in 14 months what became known as the Sihanouk Trail. Well, let me back up one. They constructed the Sihanouk Trail. Most people don't realize it. All the troops came via the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but about 70% of the equipment came via the Sihanouk Trail. International waters, Eastern European freighters leave North Vietnam, come around to the port, and they ran things up the Sihanouk Trail. If you look at the map, you can see that the Sihanouk Trail runs right along the Mekong River, which is, I'll show you later how that's an important point. In 1970, in March, Prince Sihanouk was out of town, went to Moscow and Beijing to visit his communist friends, and was overthrown by the Prime Minister, General Lon Nol. And the first thing Lon Nol did was close the port to the NVA. This created a problem, and this is a kind of not a really good map, but it shows you the area. The problem they had now, without a Sihanouk Trail, 70% of their equipment couldn't get down. So if they could push from the Ho Chi Minh Trail, push west, and get control of the Mekong River, they could put stuff on the Mekong River, move it down to the Mekong, and then the Sihanouk Trail's back in business. Only problem was the CIA had control of the Bolivans Plateau overlooking the Mekong River Valley. So they went west and they overran a bunch of CIA, they called them Paxi sites. General Taylor knows, he used to fly into them regularly back in the day. So this got the attention of people back in the U.S. Henry Kissinger headed up a thing called the Washington Special Action Group. And it was comprised of state and defense and CIA, DOD, chairman of the Joint Chiefs and others. And they came up with a plan to recapture the Bolivans Plateau to keep the NVA from using the Mekong River. And what they came up with was Operation Gauntlet. It was going to be the largest CIA operation of the war. 5,700 Hmong warrior led by CIA folks, and they were going to recapture multiple Paxi sites and the Mekong River Valley. What they did was task DOD to support that, and that was the genesis of Operation Tailwind. We were going to do a reconnaissance in force, put in a company-size operation, and provide a diversion for the CIA operation, and try to prevent reinforcements coming to the east on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Consisted of 120 Montagnards and 16 Green Berets. And that's the general location of where it would be, right in that really wet part of the monsoon season. So here's a little better map you can see with a real map. You can see that's right there is Paxi Site 26, but there were others, PS 22 and 36, I think it was. And there's the Mekong River right there. Up here at the village of Chavan is, we went in east of Chavan to put the special forces in about 15 clicks east of Chavan. And that was a segment of the Ho Chi Minh Trail called Binh Tran 44. We were supposed to prevent reinforcements from coming and just cause a distraction for them. It was going to be a tri-service mission. And many of you are probably familiar with SOG, the Studies and Observations Group. It was a top secret organization, mostly made up of Green Berets. And they generally put in small recon teams. They took over the CIA mission in 1964, and they were limited to within 20 clicks of the border because of the sensitivities of what happened when we got diplomatically thrown out of Cambodia. But they were there to, snoop and poop, as they said, and keep an eye on the MVA. Every once in a while, they'd put in what's called a hatchet force, would be a platoon size, and in this case, it was a company size operation. So the hatchet force was going to be led by Captain Gene McCarley. He hailed from Wilmington, North Carolina, a great guy, and had his 3 platoons plus a command element. If I happen to hit one of your units, give a shout out. There were Army Huey Slicks in there, call sign Bikini from the 170th. Cobras, the Pink Panthers out of the 361st. From the 20th TAS was the Fax, call sign Covey, flying O2s and OV-10s. They were coming out of Pleiku. 56 Special Operatives Wings provided A1 support. Most of them came from Thailand, NKP. 2 squadrons there, call sign Hobo and Firefly. And there was a unit up in Da Nang, call sign SPAD. They were all intimately involved in the operation. Some C-130s made right here in Marietta, Georgia were Spectre gunships out of Thailand. And then there was other C-130s, the Airborne Command and Control. They flew 12-hour shifts. During the night was Moonbeam, was their call sign, and in the day it was Hillsborough. They just slide this commo thing into the back of the C-130 and controlled all the airstrikes going into North Vietnam and all the air action over Laos and Cambodia. For the Marines, we had CH-53s, call sign Dimmer. We came out of Marble Mountain, which was up near just east of Da Nang, and the Cobra Squadron, call sign Scarface, also based at Marble Mountain. So here's the general layout of things. The Marines were coming, and some of the SPADs from up at Da Nang, OV-10s in the Army from by Pleiku. We were all going to meet in Kontum, brief, pick up the troops, and then we'd go up to Dak To, a staging area, put in a Pathfinder team, wait for the Covey to tell us whether it was good enough to get in, and we would launch from there. So this was approaching Kontum for the brief, and the Cobras and 53s landing there. This was the actual brief, and I'll have to tell you, flying helicopters a lot, a 50 cal gets your attention, but when they start throwing these acetate clear things over the map saying, now here's the 37 millimeter sights and stuff, it really kind of got everybody, all the rotor heads anyhow, it got our attention. So we briefed, we loaded up the troops and launched for Dak To. We put the troops in 4 53s and had 2 other 53s as Starbirds and 6 Cobras. When we got to Dak To, to this day, I want to thank the Army for their hospitality. They put a sign out there. It says, "Welcome U.S. Marines. Welcome to the Dak To Officers Club." And it looks like they put a fresh coat of sand on the pallets in the Officers Club, and it was a thing of beauty, and I to this day, thank you for it. So I was up on the roof of the Officers Club catching some rays with a buddy, Pat Owen, and if you notice, there's 6 53s over on the right, and then there's 6 Army or Marine Cobras, and then facing the other way there were 6 Army Cobras and 6 Army Hueys. So we're up there enjoying ourselves, and then all of a sudden there's explosions here, explosions there. So I grab my camera and I start taking pictures, and finally Pat says, maybe we ought to get down inside the bunker instead of staying up here on the roof. So we went down, got in the bunker. 2 weeks later, I got my slides developed, and then I noticed I had taken beautiful shots of the backside of the lens cover, in all the excitement. So I decided not to give up my day job and become a combat photographer. So anyhow, get inside the bunker, and I took this through the little window, and that's an Army Cobra. A guy named Pete, a warrant officer, Pete Gotch, that was his bird. He and his co-pilot, John Cole, were playing Frisbee out in the runway when the first mortar hit. And Pete says, "Let's go," meaning let's go to the helicopter. And John thought he meant, well, let's go to the bunker. So John went to the bunker. Pete runs to the helicopter, and he's untying the main rotor on the tail boom, and a mortar hits in front of it. So then he goes to the front, and he's trying to tie the helmet in the front seat so it won't bounce around, and then the mortar hits behind it. Then he starts to get in the back and climb into the cockpit, and he hears another one coming in and says, "Uh-oh, they got me bracketed." And he hits the deck, and it hit right behind the stub wing, blew away the canopy, the cowling off the engine. He did a low crawl to the ditch. Now, I've had these slides since 1970, and every 5 to 10 years, a squadron mate might come by, and we'd look at them. So over the years, I suppose I've looked at them half a dozen times or more, plus with other people, and I never noticed one thing until I start writing my book about the mission. And I got a call from this Pink Panther guy, and he says, "I'm in your picture." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And right there, running along the fence is Pete Gotch. And he was running along the fence after his helicopter got blown up. So some of our Cobras were damaged as well, and we had to abort the mission, call it a day, went back to Khartoum, went back to Marble Mountain, then we're on call every day, and the Army and the Marine Corps brass was getting ticked off because we had one Cobra squadron in the whole Marine Corps, and they were keeping the Army's keeping 6 of our Cobras on standby, and we needed them. So 3- and 4-star people were sending nasty messages back and forth. They reduced it down to 5 53s and 4 Cobras. So we tried to launch on the 10th, got called back because of weather. On the 11th, we finally went down, rebriefed, loaded the troops up, went to Khartoum. Thank you. And this time now there's the remains of that Army Cobra, Pete Gotch's Cobra. We didn't overstay our welcome this time, so the local bad guys couldn't organize another welcome for us. And we launched for Laos. That's, wrong one. There's Gene McCarley right there, Captain Gene McCarley, and that's Mike Rose, his medic, en route. We usually would like to stay above small arms fire, but the weather was marginal, so we got down, and I took several hits, and a few 3 yards were wounded, so they wouldn't disembark with us. But we get to the zone, and Pathfinder team went in and said, "All's quiet, quiet as a church, no problem." So we come in, and it wasn't a big enough zone for all 4 53s, so one at a time we put the first one in. When he's on short final, the hillsides erupt with tracers, and it was a big shootout. Fortunately, we got everybody in, all 4 get in, everybody gets shot up, but no one was killed. And as soon as the last helicopter left, Gene McCarley told me, he said, it got quiet as a church again. They stopped firing, and it got really quiet. So they headed out and hadn't even gone 500 yards. Well, I got to back up a second. I got to tell you, Gene McCarley's strategy was a game of cat and mouse. He was going to keep moving. He needed mobility and air cover. Just keep moving to disrupt the enemy and make them chase him and try to find him. So they head out, and they didn't go 500 yards, and they came upon a whole series of bunkers. And they were loaded with all kinds of ammunition and stuff. And in the first bunker, there's phones ringing. So one of the SF guys goes in there and picks it up, said, "Hello, 5th Special Forces Group, can I help you?" And of course, they hung up on the other side. So they wired up C4 wired everything up to blow these bunkers. There were 20 or 25 of them. It was a big thing. Put a 15-minute delay on it and then headed out, and they had secondary explosions for hours and hours. So it definitely announced their presence in the neighborhood and kind of ticked off the local NBA. But in the bunkers, there were, the 122 millimeter Katyusha rockets and B-40s and 50 cal ammo, 23 just all kinds of stuff. It was a big to-do. So they kept moving and then find a place to RON. But every time they'd move, they'd run into some NVA, have a firefight, break contact, go another way, run into some more, break contact, and the casualties started to mount. So on the second day, which was the 12th of September, Gene McCarley said, "What I remember most about day 2 was the disappointment at having the weather turn bad, preventing a much-needed medevac, because that was killing his mobility. There were 2 KIAs, and Mike Rose, the medic, was trying to carry him, had to make the decision to leave them there, but he had 2 litter patients as well that were badly wounded, and that was slowing things down. And at the end of the first day, he had a couple of dozen walking wounded. So the mobility was getting questionable. So the Army decides to try a medevac to get at least the 2 litter patients out of there. And they brought in a Bikini Huey led by this Panther Cobra. And the Panther Cobra went over, looked at the LZs, flying out to pick up the Huey, and he got stitched and got shot down. So that medevac became an aircrew rescue, and they couldn't get anybody out. So they fortunately picked up the guys flying it and get out of there. But this means in the game of cat and mouse, the mouse is getting slower and the cat's getting bigger. So Mike left the KIAs behind. The Cobra was shot down after they found a RON site. There was a big bomb crater that Mike put all his wounded in. Then there was an open area and a perimeter. They put all the troops around their company around the perimeter. Well, the NVA didn't know exactly where they were, so they were coming through the jungle, and they were tapping bamboo sticks, and they'd tap it. 1 time meant go forward, 2 times meant throw a grenade, 3 times meant turn around and go back. Because no one wanted to fire because the muzzle flash would give away your position. So this grenade battle broke out, and it lasted just about the whole night. So they didn't get any sleep. They were about out of grenades and starting to run low on food. Next morning, they headed out before sunrise so they could hopefully not be followed. And on the 13th, Marine said, we'll try and get the litter patients out of there and give them a resupply, because now they're starting to run low on ammo. So we brought in a CH-53. They had to blow some trees to create a zone. And 53 is flown by a guy named Bill Beardall. He's coming in, hovers 50 feet or so above it, and then he's going down vertically. He gets 5 feet off the ground. Mike Rose is handing up the first litter patient, and they take a lot of fire, start losing hydraulics, and then the rotor blades hitting some trees, and they pull out and never got the patient. Made it about 3 clicks and landed just before the last of the hydraulic fluid was pissed overboard. So now this medevac becomes another aircrew rescue. So this is another one of those slides that I had for all those years and never noticed. There's a Bill Beardall's helicopter down in the bush. Anyhow, we brought in the Starbird, and they had a big ladder on the back in a roll. It was 6-foot aluminum rungs and 3 steel cables. Pushed it out, rolled it down, and they picked up everybody. This is not a real good picture. You can kind of see them on the ladder right there. This is a better picture. I don't know who took it, but I borrowed the slide anyhow. The last person on the ladder is Bill Beardall. Well, he was looking up and he saw the end of the ladder flapping around, and he thought it might go up and hit the tail rotor and we're all going to die. So he said, I'll crawl down and anchor the bottom. But Bill was about this big and weighed 140 pounds, and he got down 3 or 4 rungs and decided, the heck with that idea. But that's the crew and the Special Forces medics that were on the Starbird. Anyhow, the next day, the 14th of September, they head out. Gene McCarley heads them out, and they hear some dogs barking. So they decided to follow the sound of the dogs, and it leads them to this base camp. So they overran this base camp, and it was a series of bunkers. There was a chow hall with rice on the cooker. There were bunk rooms with bunks with mattresses stacked 3 high. There were truck parts and bicycles and all kinds of storage areas. But they called Gene McCarley and said, "You better get down here." And he went into the command bunker, and there were all kinds of foot lockers full of documents and books and money and stuff like that. So he said, "Empty your rucksacks, grab all this stuff that we can." There was also a picture of Ho Chi Minh on the wall that somebody borrowed as a souvenir. So now the NVA, they had been bringing truckloads of people for the last 2 days down the highway, a lot of them towing 37 millimeter anti-aircraft guns, because now they're really ticked off because they got all this intelligence data from their headquarters that was overrun, and they don't want to let these guys get away. So the weather had been really, really bad, and looks like we weren't going to get any air support in there. We briefed and said, okay, we're going to have to use gas to get them out. So we'll have to use CS, tear gas, to get them out. They gave everybody gas masks. Unfortunately, they didn't have enough of these aviation gas masks, which you put on, and it has a place you can plug in your intercom so you can talk on the radio. I got this standard gas mask, put on, put my helmet over, and the buckles are digging into the top of my head. And I'm flying with a guy named Bob Grove, and we're trying to hold the boom mics against our throat and see if we could talk to each other. It didn't work, so we took them off, as did most, all the Cobra people did, and most of the 53 drivers, but it wasn't working. So on the 14th, fortunately, the weather started to break. It was really bad in the morning, and the weather broke. So then we had fixed wing, God bless the Air Force. We had these guys stacked up all the way to heaven. And so there were 3 concentric rings. We were flying in our Cobras. We were covering the zone and shooting out. Then the SPADs were coming in, trying to keep dropping CBUs, and after they dropped the gas, and trying to keep the NVA at bay. And then the fast movers were coming in further out and hitting all the anti-aircraft positions. And it was kind of a thing of beauty, actually. Gene McCarley took this particular picture and that one. Anyhow, first 53, they found a zone and pushed down the elephant grass. First 53 comes in, and there's a Staff Sergeant Bernie Bright, Special Forces. He stands up in the middle of the zone, pulls this orange panel out of his shirt, holds it up to guide in the helicopter. They come in, land right on him. They put all the intelligence stuff, the wounded, all pile them on that 53, and he takes off. Second 53 comes in. Bernie Bright stands up again with his panel. Then he drops to a knee, starts shooting at the bad guys. Third 53 comes in. It's flown by a guy named Don Persky. And Persky comes in and lands, and, you know, Sergeant Bright's doing this with his panel. He's shooting, and then he noticed Captain McCarley's running for it, and he noticed Mike Rose, and he says, uh-oh, this might be the last bus out of Dodge, because there were 4 brought them in. He thought there'd be 4 helicopters, but everybody had piled on. So he goes running. He's the last guy, jumps on the ramp, and just as he jumps on the ramp, 5 NVA come running out of the elephant grass, and he and Gene McCarley were able to kill him right there. But Gene McCarley told me numerous times over the years, he says, I just don't know why they didn't throw a grenade in there. They were that close. They could have thrown a grenade in the back of the helicopter, but they didn't, fortunately. Sergeant Snipes was the crew chief, so he has this big long cord on his headset, and he's standing outside getting everybody in. Meanwhile, number one engine gets shot out. So now Persky's got only one engine. So last guys get on board, Snipe says, let's go, and he's milking it, and he gets going, and finally gets about 4,000 feet above the ground, and on Persky's bird, everybody was wearing gas masks, and he calls back and said, okay, you can take your masks off now. So Snipes takes off his mask, reaches for his cigarettes, and goes to light up, and all the SF guys are screaming at him and pointing to the ceiling, and here's all this fuel just raining down. So they didn't go very far, and the second engine quits. So now it gets real quiet. Persky calls his mayday, mayday, lost my second engine going down, and then he's waiting for someone to say, well, looks like an LZ to the right or an LZ to the left, and there's this pregnant pause and not a word is said. And it's just solid triple canopy jungle. So if you're not a rotor head, you shoot an auto rotation, you lower the collective, it's called, and you flatten the pitch on the blade, so you're falling through the air, and the wind going up through the blades is what keeps them going. So you keep that inertia. Then when you get down by the ground, you flare, you pull pitch to use that built-up energy, and then you land, and it's a one-shot deal, and that's the way it's supposed to work. But he doesn't want to shoot an auto rotation to the top of the triple canopy jungle and then go through 80 or 100 feet of jungle, and he sees a little ridge line, and he says, well, I'll use a little of my energy to go over that ridge line, hoping for a better day on the other side. So he does that, gets over the ridge line, and here's this big, steep valley down to a stream, a river. So he dives down in there, but he doesn't have 100% rotor RPM anymore. Gets down, there's a little fork in the stream, and he does an auto rotation to a little sandy area right there where the fork is in the stream, but he pulls pitch, doesn't have enough energy. They hit really hard, plus it's sloped, and there's a big rock there. Thing rolls over, the airframe splits in two. Everybody's turned every which way upside down. And fortunately, we brought in the SAR bird, and he just kind of put one wheel on a rock in the stream, lowered the ramp, put it on the riverbank, and Mike Rose is going in, bringing people out, sending them out, and we got everybody out. 1 yard was killed. His head was crushed where the bird had broken open. But fortunately, I mean, everybody had their bells rung, and they were beaten up pretty badly, but everybody except one person got out. So got them all on the SAR bird, and we launched. This is another one of these photos. After I was writing this book and researching it, I heard from a guy named Woody Woodard. He was a Panther Cobra pilot, and he's the one who blew up the 53 after we got everybody out, destroyed it so the enemy couldn't get it. And he sent me this photo because I had two places on the map. I had some 1 to 50s of the area, and I had two places where I thought it must have gone down, and this was one of the two. So if anyone wants to lead an expedition out there to find the remains, I can tell you exactly where it is. So anyhow, we made it back to Dak To. Cold beer waiting for everybody. There's Gene McCarley right there, and there's Mike Rose getting his couple of Schlitz, and here's the guys that brought the picture of Ho Chi Minh. There's their souvenir. So this was taken at FOB2 at their operating base for the Special Forces camp a couple days later. That's I think 13 or 14 of them, and all the Americans were wounded. Upwards of 50 Montagnards were wounded. Mike Rose was ambulatory. They'd come to him. Other times he would go out, someone's wounded, and he'd go out and lay down next to them, try to treat them, shield their body with his, and then he dragged them through a hail of fire, drag him back to his position, and did this constantly, in addition to being wounded himself. So it was an exciting time at all, but it was, top secret mission, so you never talked about it to anybody. So a couple weeks later, we get a message. It says, come down to Khartoum for a debrief. So we get to Khartoum for the debrief, and the steaks are on the grill, all the beer you could drink. We had a great time. It turned out this was the largest and deepest and most productive mission that SOG had ever run during the war. Because of all that intelligence they got hundreds and hundreds of documents all relating to the infrastructure and everything on the Ho Chi Minh Trail and status of forces and stuff like that. So we had a great time there. We were supposed to fly back later that evening, but you know, somehow there was a mechanical problem with the helicopter and we had to spend the night. It was one of those things we had to. So, you know, these, as you guys know, you go across the fence, you never talk about it, it's top secret and it's never mentioned, but there were a lot of moving parts on this mission and it's hard to keep a secret. So about 6 weeks later, above the fold on the front page of the New York Times, it says, U.S. casualties in Laos reported in secret actions. Special forces suffered losses that were never divulged or something like that. But it never got any traction and it blew over. And it gathered dust in a classified archive somewhere, I suppose. And then 28 years later, CNN got a hold of it and made a documentary. And they were having a new show called Newsstand. This was their initial edition of Newsstand, CNN and Time in conjunction. So they broadcast this documentary, and in the documentary, they accused us of committing war crimes, of using nerve gas to kill women and children and American defectors. So the episode was called Valley of Death, and it was broadcast on a Sunday evening, June 7th in '98. As soon as it ended, AP Wire Service picked up the story. And then the French Wire Service picked up the story, and then the Chinese Wire picked up the story, and by morning it had gone around the world multiple times. And the newspapers all around the world were saying, U.S. used nerve gas during Vietnam. Now this is a time when we're accusing Saddam Hussein of using weapons of mass destruction. So he points the hypocrite finger at us, and of course the Russians go to the UN and pound the table and saying, you hypocrites, look what you did, you were using it, yada, yada, yada. Well, CNN, Time was in with the CNN on this, and they ran an article about it as well. The Special Operations Association was the first to raise the BS flag on this, and actually the next day Reuters contacted Admiral Moore, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and said, did you say this or did you say, and he said, no, I never said those things that they reported to him. So within a week, CNN kind of became the story instead of Tailwind being the story. And then from the New York Times to Newsweek magazine, everybody, they're looking at CNN. Well, they doubled down and they rebroadcast it the following Sunday. But then it was a tsunami of people saying, this just doesn't hold water. You know, this dog won't hunt. It just doesn't gel. So they hired an outside investigator, a guy named Floyd Abrams, a First Amendment attorney out of New York that was rather famous. Floyd Abrams came down and did an investigation, and he said, the central thesis of the broadcast could not be sustained, that we used nerve gas in Laos. And he said CNN should retract the broadcast and apologize to the public, and in particular to participants of Operation Tailwind. And then Walter Isaacson, the editor of Time magazine, did the same thing. They ran an editorial like CNN, we retract the story and apologize. The thing was, it was an apology, but it was like a halfway apology. It was not to say it didn't happen. It was to say, we're sorry we ran the story. We really didn't have enough information. We shouldn't have run the story, and we apologize for running that. So it kind of sticks in your craw a little bit. But it affected everybody at CNN. Ted Turner was delivering a speech out in the West Coast, and he said, nothing matched the remorse he felt over the Valley of Death fiasco. Ted Turner was a visionary, and people ask me if I hate CNN, and I don't. But they're a news organization. Everybody turned to CNN for news, and they were trying to compete with, news became big business. Once CNN was born, news became big business. So then you had 60 Minutes, and you had the Dateline NBC and these other news type shows, and CNN wanted to compete with that. So they brought in this Sharpie from ABC, a guy named Kaplan, to be president of this new outfit. And anyhow, it was a little insular organization of 35 people within CNN who created the whole Tailwind story, and nobody outside of that group knew about it. They had Jamie Dupree, their Washington correspondent, their Pentagon correspondent, didn't know a thing about it. Their military advisor, Perry Smith, retired Air Force general, he didn't know a thing about it until 3 days before it aired. So it really affected Ted Turner and everybody at the organization. They were kind of ticked about it. The good news is that DOD investigated and declassified everything. So they declassified it, and in April of 2001, 29 years later, SOG was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, which they much deserved for all their years over there. And then Mike Rose, the medic, had been written up for the Medal of Honor, and it was downgraded to the DSC. Once people saw what all he did, the effort was resurrected for Mike to be awarded the Medal of Honor. And in 2016, the Congress waived the 5-year rule on receiving the medal. And then the next year, in 2017, Mike was awarded the Medal of Honor, much deserved. So I was at the Medal of Honor ceremony, and that's when I said, I'm going to write a book about this. And I thought I could do it in a year or two, but it took me about 5 years of research before I finally got the thing finished. But anyhow, it's a great story, and the Medal of Honor is a wonderful thing, but as we used to say, the best medal is a live man's smile, and so that's the thing that always sticks with me. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to field them. Yeah.
What kind of gas was that they did use there?
We use CS, which is an industrial strength tear gas. But they claimed we use sarin gas. CNN claimed we use sarin.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, sarin's not that discriminating. Most of a little side story I left out on the 13th, after the first 53 got shot down when we tried the medevac, the Air Force came in and said, we're going to do a little resupply. We can't medevac anybody. So they got an OV-10. They got 3 duffel bags, one full of claymores, one full of ammunition, and one full of gas masks. And they put a guy in the back, a Special Forces guy in the back of the OV-10, flew over it, pulled up, said, okay, kick it out now. He kicked it out. They had found this old cargo parachute. Guy kicks it out, and the drogue chute comes out and disintegrates in a cloud of green dust because it was an old dry rotted chute. And the whole thing of claymores and ammo and gas masks landed on the hillside right where all the muzzle flashes were coming from. So they spent the rest of the afternoon trying to destroy that. But most of the guys on the ground didn't have gas masks, or they got wet when they were crossing streams, and the filters were no good. And they're being interviewed and saying, well, yeah, there's dead NBA everywhere, but yet they're walking. I mean, no one had any signs of gas on them. You know, tear gas, it clears up in 10 minutes, 30 minutes if you're exposed to it. Nerve gas, it's days. You can see it in your eyes, mitosis and all this other stuff. Nobody had any symptoms. And how can the Americans walk through nerve gas and the NVA fall over dead and the Americans don't. I mean, it just didn't make any sense.
Is there any indication of where's the origin of this false story? What's the origin of that?
You'd have to read the book. Not that I'm pushing the book, but actually there was a cameraman named Mike Marriott, an Australian guy, who was an NBC cameraman, spent 8 years, I think, in Vietnam, and he ended up with CNN. The producer was April Oliver, and before this news show came about, they had another news show that failed that was called Impact, and they had run a story on SOG across the fence. So she was down at Fort Bragg contacting her SOG sources and having dinner with Mike Marriott, and he starts telling her about, he said he went for a ride in the back of an F-4 as a newsman for a bombing run over North Vietnam in early 1970. Doesn't matter that we quit bombing the North in 1968. That was his story, and he was sticking to it. And he said he got briefed before he left on this secret weapon, and it was a sleeping gas. And if you get shot down, you're supposed to call for this. It was called glink. And he said you call for glink, and they say lay down and lay down, cross your arms over you, and they spray glink all over the area, and it puts everybody to sleep. And then the helicopter, Jolly Green, would come in, they'd get you, they'd pull you out, and they give you the antidote, and you wake up. And that was his story. And he tells that to April Oliver, and she's thinking, gas, yeah. So April Oliver was a really smart lady, and after Abrams' report, it was kind of the fix was in, because heads roll, stuff flows downhill. And she was at the bottom as producer. She got fired, and her boss got retired. But this guy Kaplan, the president, who came in to jazz up these stories, he never did. He left with a golden parachute. That's where the gas story originated. Was Mike Marriott, this cameraman. And then you get confirmation bias. It's a human thing. We all want. People are saying, no, there was no gas, but if someone gives you just an inkling of, oh, yes, there must have been, and you latch onto that because it confirms what you believe, and it went from there.
I've had the good fortune to read the book, and I highly recommend it, because if you want to know, he did a lot of work, Barry did, refuting all the bad press there, and the last part of the book goes into great detail about that, and it's something to have in your hip pocket when people start talking about the false stories that are out there about what went on. He did a tremendous job, and it's a great job just talking about the operation, but I think just as importantly, or maybe more so, is how he refuted the bad press that came out again about what we did.
Yes, sir.
Exact date of this mission?
Pardon me?
Exact date of this mission?
Of September 11th through the 14th, 1970.
Snake, I spent a good bit of time with SOG, both at CCN and CCC. And while some of the operations we did weren't as big as Tailwind, we worked on that Ho Chi Minh Trail constantly, did all kinds of things to them. And one of our missions that I remember, I wasn't on this one, when we came back and let MacV know that there were tanks coming down the trail. Wouldn't believe us. So the next team out did some paper mache casts of it, took it back, threw it on the table for them. They finally believed it, and they did come. But that trail provided for a lot of our missions across the fence.
Yeah, it sure did.
By the way, I have read the book, and it's excellent. And I believe Barry's got some to sell in the back if anybody's interested. But it is a great book.
Thank
You
you
can
very
give me
much.
that 100 I owe you.
Yeah.
Barry, I think everyone totally and thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. The book sounds great. We very much appreciate your coming and sharing it with us. Larry, thanks for introducing Barry to us. On behalf of the Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association, first, our most extraordinary challenge coin.
All right.
And for reading for you, this is written by many of the members here. It's a series of short stories of their time in Vietnam. So thank you very much for being here. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Oh,
That's for you.
well done.
Okay. Thank you very much.